privacy in this place. You could be sitting in your bedroom and suddenly some crude looking stranger would push the door open without even knocking, asking where Hilda was. You would be in the bathroom bathing and you would hear someone enter and lift the toilet bowl and get on with their business without saying a word to you. Not that you would have wanted them to. And the only thing that stood between you both was a shower curtain. They had to share the bathroom and toilet with two other families, something Hortense had never done in her life. One thing was for sure, Hilda had not been living as well as she had put on. True, this was one of the few concrete houses in Cassava Peace, and one of the few with indoor plumbing, and it did in truth and in fact belong to Hilda. The house was big enough, but not very well kept. In fact, it was very run down and needed a good scrub and some fresh paint. Hortense would see to all that by and by, because she could not and would not live in filth and stench. But she shook her head at Hilda's deception. Hilda had been running off her mouth about her fancy home. She had just been trying to show off on country people. Hortense felt uprooted and displaced. It took her months to bring herself to join another congregation, and when she did, she found that the people were stuck up and unfriendly. The neighbors blasted music from jukeboxes from sunup till sundown, and went to sleep at wee hours of the night. Hortense wondered if some of them even slept at all. They quarreled all the time and very loudly, so that even if you were trying to mind your business, you couldn't help overhearing theirs. Those who had radios or television sets, and a surprising number of them did, in spite of the fact that they ran illegal connections directly from the main power supply on the street, turned them up to high pitch and left them on. Hilda explained that most of these people didn't pay for electricity. They stole it. However they managed that, Hortense did not want to know. It was not in her culture to steal anything from anyone, not even government. Hortense went to the Coronation Market downtown on the third Saturday after she arrived. Luckily, Hilda had gone with her, for no amount of country market experience could have prepared Hortense for that level of chaos. The market was filthy and the people were aggressive. They literally demanded that you buy. They quarreled over everything. The vendors quarreled about people filling up their produce, and the buyers quarreled about the prices and about not getting brought up. At the farmers' market in Brownstown, or even in the general produce market in Ochi, people argued and haggled and threatened and fussed, but not to this degree, and most of that fussing was play fussing anyway, just something they did to have a little fun on a Saturday morning. They always parted as friends, and there was always lots of brattle. You didn't have to quarrel for it. And the Coronation Market, there were handymen, handcart men who would rub your heels off with their makeshift carts if you didn't mind sharp. Hortense wasn't sure she could manage that market situation at all, not to sell in and not to buy in. This was a whole new standard, one she wasn't sure she could rise to at all. In Cassava Peace, there was hardly any tree in sight. There was no space for Hortense to plant a kitchen garden. She had to resort to planting some things in pots, but getting good soil proved more challenging than she had thought. Eventually, she had some thyme and potted tomatoes, but they didn't seem to like pots. The man who rode by selling eggs and shouting out, "Fresh eggs!" turned out to be a big fat liar. He never ever had fresh eggs, ever. At least, not as fresh as Hortense knew they should be. You could only get cow's milk in boxes, and asking for goat's milk was like asking for a glass of gas oil to drink. People looked at her and laughed. Only the older folks remembered fresh goat's milk. In Cassava Peace, noise was a constant thing, and it wasn't even the noise of peeny-wallies or crickets or goats bleating. It was the blaring, unhealthy sound of jukeboxes and quarrels and dozens of cars honking all at once. The only animals you ever saw were wild cats and mongrel dogs, and troops of rats and cockroaches in the kitchen at night, and biting ants and termites that had colonized every corner of the house. And there was no place for Turnip to play. When he started creeping, it was so painful to see that he had to be kept locked up inside. Hortense wanted to go home. She was not happy here, nor could ever be. Nathaniel had not expected to be happy, so it had not bothered him too much that day when he had to confess to himself that he was not happy here, or could ever be either. Before he caught himself dead in his tracks, he had let down his guard just a wee bit, and his thoughts had wandered, and he had started to miss the rolling fields of green, the cows grazing, the grass cruising in the soft wind. He was missing the sunrise in Walker's Wood, and sitting down to eat his pickle at noon after a long morning of breaking some healthy sweat. But he caught himself in time, just as he was about to say to Hortense, "I wonder what them folks doing back home now." In Cassava Peace, nobody said Mas Natty. Everybody just said Natty, even the teenagers. Only the very small children said Missa Natty. When Hilda was at home, she was more than likely sleeping or shut up in her room with one of her boyfriends. When she could take the time out of her busy schedule, she would laze around the house and chat with the others or play with Turnip. Hilda had this habit of introducing her boyfriends to the baby, and she would say, "This is your Uncle Floyd," or "Turnip, say hello to Uncle Otis." His parents did not like this. Nathaniel had no idea he had so many brothers. One night, after Hilda had stayed out till 1 o'clock with Uncle Larry, she came home drunk and disgruntled everyone by running through the house screaming obscenities. Uncle Larry tried to quiet her down, and Hilda punched him, and he ended up beating her until Nathaniel and Bruce charged out and Uncle Larry was thrown from the family house. Hilda was getting older. It was beginning to show. She looked tired and worn out and beat up, in spite of the heavy layers of makeup and the fancy hairdos and the mini skirts and the perfumes that she seemed to swim in. And the quality of her boyfriends was depreciating too. They were getting fatter and frowsier and freakier, and each new recruit looked more like a riffraff than his predecessor. Hortense had even heard Hilda say jokingly, though there was a flicker of sobriety in her eyes, that she was considering taking a job as a domestic helper. Now, the only straw that Hilda had ever lifted in her life was her straw hat. Everything she owned had been gifts from admirers. She had not told them, but the main reason she had been so keen to get the others to come to Kingston was so that they could all split the electricity and water bills and share grocery. And Hilda was planning to tell them that she might have to start charging them a little rent, just a little token, nothing to kill anyone. But she wasn't ready to drop that bomb yet. Like every move she made in life, Hilda waited for the right time. She had always been very feline in her stalking and pouncing. One thing that never stopped was Hilda's criticism of Hortense, saying how drab Hortense was, and why didn't she buy herself a nice dress, instead of wrapping up all the time in long frock and tie head like she was a Pocomania woman. It got so bad that one day Nathaniel had to intervene and warn Hilda to mind her own business. "I'm just trying to help," Hilda said. "A woman must fix herself up and look good. You men don't mind your women at home looking drab, but your mistress, she has to look hot and ready." "You ever see me with a mistress?" Nathaniel flared. Hilda told him to cool down, that she was only making fun. When Hortense sat down to feed Turnip, Hilda would say, "You gonna let that boy pull your breast out of shape? Why don't you give him some formula? Why you don't go have some children of your own and leave other people's children alone?" Bruce would put in. But neither of them knew was that Hilda could not have any children, and that she desperately wanted to. She had tried, but eventually it was confirmed that she couldn't have any. "Look who's talking. When last you see your own children, eh, Mr. Bruce?" And the house was beginning to smell like the neighbor's own, with what with the constant bickering. No matter what he had to put up with, Bruce was not going to be leaving Kingston. Not at any time soon, no sir. He liked it here. Kingston moved to his beat. Bruce had taken to gambling and drinking and swearing and chasing frocktails, especially those of schoolgirls. They were all skills he had been sharpening in Walker's Wood, but he had them filed to a razor-cutting edge right now. Bruce was one of the slickest dudes this side of town, older by far than the other boys who hung out on the wall, but he had learnt their lingua, and he dressed like them, and he knew how to greet them with all kinds of silly maneuvering of the hands. Nathaniel did not approve of Bruce's behavior any more than he approved of Hilda's. But one, they were both older than he, and two, Nathaniel was sure that Mr. Spiteful would not be punishing them for their loose action. So busy he was in punishing hard-working, law-abiding citizens. So who was he to complain? Mr. Spiteful only punished righteous people. Bruce and Hilda were quite safe. Nathaniel could offer them no proof that a change of life and a positive reform in behavior would make them any better off for it. He himself was no longer convinced that it would make them any better off. It might very well make them worse off, in fact, for they would lose their livelihood. So he let them live their lives the way they pleased. Both Nathaniel and Hortense had been looking for work, but good employment was hard to come by. The first job Hortense took was as a domestic helper. She did not think lowly of the job per se, but she had not expected that she would have been required to do certain things. The couple lived not too far from Cassava Peace, in the hills overlooking Havendale, so Hortense could easily walk to work. And they said that they didn't mind that she had to take Turnip with her. But Hortense had not conceived that a grown woman would have wanted somebody to wash her dirty undergarments for her, or bathe and dress her 9-year-old daughter, or search her bag before she left each evening, as if they thought she was a common thief. So Hortense quit that job after 1 week, but she was lucky enough to be called in for another interview very quickly after that at the post office near Meadowbrook. But when Hortense went in, her hopes were dashed. The ladies said that Hortense would not be allowed to take Turnip with her, but if she could arrange to leave him somewhere, the job was hers. So that job was a no-no. Hilda encouraged Hortense to do some buying and selling, and she accompanied Hortense to the wholesale downtown to stock up. Hortense bought some cute little vests and children's shorts and fancy girls' dresses and men's pants lengths and ladies' panties and all manner of pretty things. She also made gizadas and drops and asham and sold them on the side. She could not go about walking with the things like a saleswoman, but Hortense set up a little stall on the veranda, and everything went well for the first few weeks, till month end came and she went around to the people who had credited her things, and they gave her all kinds of cock and bull stories and made her raging mad. Now, most people didn't know, but Hortense had a little temper of all of her own, and when she got mad, she was liable to hit people over with chairs or vases or whatever was in her reach. This temper had been latent for donkey years, but it seemed like Kingston was about to pull it out of her. And since she had come to town, she had been separated from her church and had been brought to this God-forsaken place where everybody cursed. And Hortense was thinking she might just be capable of telling somebody about their wara tara para if they didn't give her her money. And she didn't care that it was said that Cassava Peace was the kind of place where anyone could be suspected of having a gun or knife or ice pick hidden off someplace, so don't mess with them. Hortense gave up the buying and selling business and was at home for a couple more months. Then she was downtown one day and chanced to pass by the craft market and saw the lovely displays hung up for sale. Hortense spent hours browsing and gazing and making friends, so that by the time she left, she knew where to buy the straw and the raffia and the really big needles, and she knew where the sewing machines were sold, and she knew how to contact the owner of the craft market about getting a stall there. Hortense knew that was what she wanted to do. Nathaniel had not fared so well in that first year, not that he had really expected to. He had taken a job as a sideman on a truck, the owner of which waited like a harbor shark outside a well-known hardware store and took charters delivering items to people's houses or whatever they wanted them delivered. It was not a bad job. There was a lot of muscle work in it, but Nathaniel was used to that. Sometimes people even gave him tips when they saw that he had been willing to carry bags of cement to their doorways without complaint. But then after 4 months, the man suddenly migrated and Nathaniel was left without work. He went around the residential areas offering his services as a gardener. But everybody wanted references and papers and a whole lot of rigmarole. and Nathanael was from country and didn't have any references. He was passing by a construction site one day, and he stopped to beg a drink of water because he had been walking all day looking for work. It occurred to him to ask the foreman casually if they needed any extra hands. And the man said that yes, they did, and Nathanael was hired on the spot. He worked with that construction company for a good many years. During that first year also, Hortense became pregnant again. Nathanael wasn't sure how it had happened because he certainly hadn't intended it. Something must have leaked when he was pulling out. He was not a man who had been accustomed to practicing any form of birth control, crude or otherwise, but as he had decided that he would never ever cause another child to come into this wicked world, he had consulted Bruce, and the expert had instructed Nathanael on how to withdraw. But he hadn't had much practice with this withdrawal thing, and as it seemed so unnatural, Nathanael's heart wasn't in it, and that must have been why he had leaked. Hortense had that baby, and 3 months after that, Nathanael seemed to have leaked again, so that Hortense was pregnant once more. This time, Nathanael was so cross that he decided never to have sex again, and he didn't, not for a mighty long time. Both babies turned out to be girls, and their father named them Agatha and Galvani. Nathanael gave them these names out of spite, because he was so upset. He had not wanted to bring any more children into this world, which was full of misery and evil and nasty surprises. It seemed to Nathanael that he was playing right into the hands of Mr. Spiteful. End of chapter 5. Okay, so we're going to stop this video right there. End of chapter 5. Please join me as we continue the reading of The Fighter in the Family. A very sad book, but we'll see what happens. Maybe there's some joy at the end. Right now, we're going to be sad with Nathanael as he goes through his grief.